One of the first rules anyone serious about writing learns is to avoid cliche openings like, "for as long as we can remember," or "since the dawning of time." Rarely can a single body of work make such bold claims without coming off as incoherent drivel. Today, though, I break this rule. Since the dawning of time, wars have been fought by men, whether with club and stone, sword and bow, or bomb and drone. Humankind has worked ceaselessly to endeavor the destruction of others. As humankind has developed, so have our understanding of war and the driving forces behind it, as well as the men who've shaped it. In recent years, three words have emerged as the root of all male-driven evil: the patriarchy and hypermasculinity. Though some say that these terms are one and the same, the patriarchy refers to the systemically male development, ruling, and regulating of our society, whereas hypermasculinity is a means of understanding the specific attributes of the individuals who comprise and enforce the patriarchy. But what does any of this have to do with children's literature? Absolutely everything. It's common knowledge now that children are impressionable, constantly learning and absorbing information from their environment. Societally, we've so believed this that people have attempted, and often been successful, in banning all sorts of media. In the late 90s and early 2000s, it was thought that graphic depictions of violence in video games and television were the culprits behind horrific mass killings like the Columbine shootings. Though nobody has ever been able to successfully determine whether this particular example holds any truth, the general idea that media can have both positive and negative effects on youth remains. So what happens when we inadvertently or purposefully provide images to children that reinforce the notion of hypermasculinity? Consider the following clips from Princess Mononoke. Princess Mononoke is a great place to start our conversation because it has been hailed by many as a revolutionary film which breaks down gender stereotypes for women. But what messages does it send about men? The male characters, especially the animals in this film, are violent and aggressive. But since animals represent that which is natural, and humankind is all about that which is unnatural, a strange message begins to be exampled. Violence, aggression, and all other hallmark traits of a hyper-masculine human man are commonplace and natural for male animals. In my opinion, this has the power to forge one major impulse in male-identifying children. I think of it as the monkey see, monkey do effect, in which a child emulates the animal because it has been anthropomorphized so thoroughly it seems entirely human. A child might run around screaming and pounding his chest like King Kong while parents look on with vague amusement. Boys will be boys, after all. This action can prove to be formative for a male child. When emulating was depicted as natural for the first time, a male child will often look for social cues to determine whether his actions are acceptable or taboo. Laughter, indulgent smiles, or really any strong attention at all are indicators that the performance of hypermasculinity has been successful. This is just one of many reinforcements of hypermasculinity that a male child might receive over his lifetime. But a child doesn't remain a child forever, and eventually they grow into adults who have played at being wild, aggressive, demanding, dominant animals their entire lives. The result of which can be all too devastating. It's important to consider how we depict characters in films and television, which will be consumed by children, and doubly so to enforce the notion that violence which they see in these films, particularly by animals, cannot nor ever should be emulated or copied. The battle over hypermasculinity and its toxic effects is not going to be won by adults arguing with adults, but rather by adults understanding what media we ask our children to consume. And the first step is to create content which depicts boys and men as something other than ravenous, terrorizing animals.